Hey gang! I thought I'd do another one of the day in the life of the luthier videos, focusing on what I thought were going to be small jobs. When you run a repair shop, you basically have to work on 3 or 4 shorter projects at once, otherwise you end up sitting there twiddling your thumbs waiting for the glue to dry, which isn't profitable and actually it spells doom. As it turns out, these took longer than I thought they would and it stretched into 2 days, which isn't uncommon. At the same time, there were other things going on as well, replacing tuners. I installed a jack, not all that captivating. Sometimes I do wish that I could present them all sequentially as the work takes place, but I think you might lose the narrative then. It's easier watching them unfold without bouncing back and forth. So, here we go. Okay, we'll see if we can get some of these off the books. First up here, we've got a resonator cigar box. It's kind of cute. It's got a pickup in it, and as soon as I pick it up I notice that the jack is loose there. It's spinning around. That's not a good thing. But the main reason it's here is the action, which is 11/64 on both bass and treble, which isn't good. That's about twice what you'd want it to be, at least. So we're going to see if we can improve that somehow. A lot will depend on what kind of neck joint was used here. How's this thing tuned? Okay, octaves. So C, G, C, G. That's pretty cool. I like that. Okay, take the strings off. This thing has a great big access panel in the back. Okay, so the neck is held on with 3 screws. The top 2 are going to be difficult to reach. The pickup there is blocking them, so I guess that's going to have to come out so I can get a screwdriver in there. So it seems like this pickup isn't height adjustable except through the use of shims, which is okay, I guess, as long as it's the right height. The 3 screws were very deeply countersunk beneath the surface of the neck block. Took a whole lot of twisting to get these things out of there. And what do you know? That thing's not coming off, it's been glued in place. It's just great. So I'm going to do the Kung Fu neck reset again. Use the feeler gauge to score the amount I need to remove for proper angle. And saw the neck off using a flush cutting saw. This is a little wobbly. I stopped and held the thing in my vise so it would be a little more secure. Then I'm doing the typical sandpaper pulling to increase the neck angle. Then it's time to get back to cranking. Alright guys, now I'm mad. I did the neck reset, pulled the neck back, and everything went as usual. I also replaced the saddle because it was very low to begin with, and a piece had split out between 2 of the string grooves, so they wouldn't stay in place. I'm not sure of the species, but it's really soft. It might even be softwood. Kind of looks like spruce. So I made a new one out of maple. I strung it up, and I decided to let it sit overnight just to let things settle, plus it was getting late. The action at that point was 6/64 of an inch, and I thought I'd come back today, plane a little bit off the saddle, dial it in perfect, and we'd be ready to go. So, now, 12 hours later, that ain't gonna happen, because the action right now is back up to 10/64, basically where we started from. The issue here isn't really the neck angle, it's the box. The whole cigar box thing was cute. Okay, I get it. It's fun to do. If you want a bit of a project, you can be a kind of a hipster, you can make something in your backyard out of an old crate. But when you start trying to sell this idea to the buying public, there are certain assumptions of quality and longevity that go along with that. And by and large, this design cannot handle steel strings. It's fine for nylon strung ukuleles, that kind of stuff. You put 80 pounds of string pressure on this and it just folds up. You see, this thing is predicated on the idea of a torsion box. You've got two thin skins stretched over the frame, and it's really rigid structure if you do it right. But as soon as you start cutting holes into that, you've lost it, unless you make up for it in some way by putting in a whole bunch of interior bracing to counteract the loss of rigidity. And in this case, all that bending force from the strings is centered right here in front of the neck. Because there's no fingerboard extension to counteract that, spread the force out and prevent the neck block from tipping. So what do? They cut a big hole for a pickup. And there's no bracing on either side of this thing except for, just enough to hold the screws for the pickup in there. And the first transverse brace doesn't come, until it's right up here next to the well. So you got this big expanse here that's just ripe for bending. And then we'll do exactly the same thing on the back. So the neck block in this is really narrow. It's like ½ an inch, something you'd see in a violin. So there's very little resistance to the tipping action. The back braces, they're small, they're transverse, and they don't actually meet the sides of the box. They're free floating. So, not a great idea. There's just no resistance in this area to the folding action. You can see it in the back. See that gap there where it's bulging outwards? Same with the top. It's bending in there right in front of the cone well. I don't think this thing is very old, but the lifespan on it could only be a couple of years before it's completely unplayable. And really, the thing that gets me is it's unfixable. You guys know I hate disposable guitars. They're just against everything I believe in. Say I had to manufacture something like this and bring it in for around the same cost. What would I do differently? Well, from an efficiency standpoint, probably the easiest and cheapest thing you could do would be to make it with a neck with an integral Spanish-style heel, a slipper foot that travels up a good ways along the back and has a nice beefy transverse brace at the end of it that would spread that bending force out over a much wider area, transfer it to the sides, and basically triangulate it, make it much more rigid. And if you had to go with the separate neck, first of all, I'd make a bigger neck block, which is less prone to tipping, and I wouldn't glue the neck in place on there. Like, if you're going to use screws or bolts, just make it a screw or bolt-on neck, something that I could adjust later on. Or, forget it altogether, just glue a piece of 2x4 in there and route it out for a Fender-style neck pocket, something you could shim. That's cheap and easy, not too difficult. There's nothing special about this pickup placement. You could move that up a ways, not a big deal. Or put a nice big brace right beside it. I'd also orient the back braces in a different direction. These little tiny ones that are floating do nothing. Put them longitudinal, like this. Be much more rigid design. I'd also extend the fingerboard over the top, even if it's only an inch or two. That glue area on there really limits the neck's ability to slide forward, and it keeps it in plane with the top. It just makes sense. Of course, the other way to go would be to treat this like a banjo rim and use a coordinator rod inside that extends from the neck all the way to the tail block. Could be a piece of all thread with a little turnbuckle on it, and you can pre-tension it to, counteract this bending force. Or similarly, just do what National Resophonic guitars have always done and make it a through neck design, have it step down, go all the way to the end block again, and take up the tension that way. I mean, it should not take any more money or assembly time to do any of these things. Maybe costs an extra 50 cents. So I made up a couple of back braces here that will be angled slightly and take up that load from the neck block and push it out towards this transverse brace. And I also added a secondary brace that runs all the way across the back right beside that one. Let's talk about what we can do to remedy the situation in this particular guitar. I'll draw a side view plan. So this is the neck. This is the neck block area, the back. So that's basically what it's like when it's at rest. When string tension hits it, the neck comes up, that front block starts to tip inwards towards the back, and in this case we've also got a folding situation. So at full string tension, it looks something like this, and that's how we get that very high action. Now we've remedied this situation a little bit by adding those braces along the back in this area here. But there's still the tendency for this front block to tip forward, acting like a hinge on this point here. So the remedy for that would be to add a triangular style brace like this. And that's what I'm going to do. I might even add some on this side as well. This will be very rigid. And in fact, when I go to glue this up, what I'll probably do is clamp the body down flat and push the neck downwards slightly, increasing this angle. So this will no longer be 90 degrees, it'll actually be slightly obtuse. Something like this, like 91 degrees. So when I glue in these braces, this will actually be preloaded against the stress of string tension. This is why in my steel string guitars I always make the neck blocks, rather than rectangles, I adopt the Spanish slipper foot that extends outwards like this, or a shape like this. Because these shapes, you know, there's no way you can tip this forward. Okay, I've got the body clamped flat, and I've drawn the neck backwards by about 1 degree or so. I'll show you on this side because it's easier to film. There we go, just a little triangular block. Call it a tenteone in Spanish guitar making. A little triangle. Butts up against the end block there. Get that position where I want it. Squeeze it in. And clean up the glue. Yeah, that's a little too mushy there too, so I had to make another brace. And then I got really creative and made 2 little posts that would go underneath the front edge of the sound well there. In a resonator guitar, rigidity is your friend. It's all about reflective quality. You don't need that box pumping away. Alright, JN, I think we've seen just about enough of you. Don't show up around these parts again, you hear? So, yeah, I'm going to call it done. Am I happy? No, not really. After reducing the action again, things started to come up a little bit more. So I took it down again. I think we got it pretty much stabilized. The thing I don't like is, even after all that work, I'm ending up with a saddle that is, well, it's about as low as you'd want it to be. So there's no downward mobility. There's no future adjustment for this thing, which is, that's the worst case scenario for a neck reset. Don't like it. And the action ended up being around 6/64, 3/32 on the bass side, around 5/64 on the treble. Is that an action you want to tell someone and be proud of? No, but it's functional. It's much better than it was, and I can't do better, which it galls me. You know, every once in a while my wife says, hey, you've got to show one where you fail. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't happen all that often, but, you know, in this case, I can only charge so much for this work that I'm doing, and in my estimation, we ran out of the budget a long time ago, and I've been repairing it on spite, just because I won't let it get the best of me. So, we're at a standstill. The stupid thing is, I actually like this. It sounds great, it's really fun to play. There's things I would change, like the nut spacing here is ridiculously wide. It's nowhere near a guitar or banjo, and of course the neck has about 3/8 of an inch on either side of the outside strings, which just feels really weird on the hand. I think they did that so they could get away with using the 4 inner lugs of a pickup like this. I'd change it, you know. There are a lot of things I would change, but like I say, I feel like I almost want to steal all the parts off this and make something else, because it's a fun instrument. So, if someone wants me to build one, I'll do it, but it'll be much different in some ways. Okay, so I'll play this thing, make some sounds on it, and we'll call it a day. This is a Gibson from 1955. It's a J50. It's basically the same guitar as a J45, but rather than put a sunburst finish on it, they finished it natural. And it's in excellent condition overall, except for something around the sound hole here. Isn't that a shame? But the owner saved the pieces. Excellent news. So hopefully we can heal this right up and make it go away. The owner is relatively new to this guitar, and he's under the impression that this might not be its first rodeo here. It may have broken off in the past before, and just looking at it I can see that there is a crack that runs from the hole up to the rosette. Above the break here, which seems like an older crack, it's kind of darkened, and on this side similarly there's some sort of dark residue that may or may not be glue. So yeah, I think it's possible. Looking at the underside here, yeah, you can see the dark residue against that brace and the underside of the top in those areas where it may have previously been glued. We also seem to be missing some material directly underneath that rosette ring. It's possible the whole thing caved in at some point and broke off at the edge of the brace, and it was glued in place with those parts missing. So I'm going to have to make a splint or something that will go under this area and provide support from beneath, because just gluing to that plastic is not going to be the strongest bond, and I don't want this thing to break again in the future. Have a look at this fragment up at the top. If you study it for a little while, you might come to some conclusions about what's actually going on here. The nice thing about these pieces is that, well, on this first break here, there's a little fragment of grain line under there, which kind of acts like a key, and they fit in almost identically. This one broke off at an angle too, so it provides a nice landing surface. So this thing should patch up really nicely. We'll still see those older cracks there, but this fresh break should be almost invisible. I'm just cleaning and degreasing the area with a little bit of denatured alcohol. Just the lightest touch with 220 grit paper, just to rough up that inner surface on the plastic so the glue will have something to hold on to. I'm going with fish glue, which will be a surprise to some people, but it actually sticks really well to plastic. Yeah, I can see by the way this is discolored that it has definitely had something in it before. Because of the missing material on the underside, it's pretty difficult to clamp this thing flat, but I've got this plexiglass caul here on top. The high initial tackiness of the fish glue is kind of a help. It tends to, stay where you put it. So I can use this to kind of push up on and try to keep the top surface, in one plane. So this is glued back on and it's nice and flat, but it's really fragile right now. Like if I pushed too hard, it would probably snap right off again, because it's just relying on the end grain to the plastic rosette ring and a little bit on either side. So I really do want to put some structure underneath it. That's not that easy though, because you remember we saw the exposed rosette line from below. When this thing broke off originally, it lost about half its thickness. So the broken area here is thinner than the rest of the top. If I put a cleat in there that spans this, it's not going to contact on the broken area. There'd be a void there, which is something I'd want to avoid. So what I've got to do is first of all fill in the broken area, and then I can go and make a patch that will cover the entire thing and span from one side to the other and provide good strength. The underside of the broken piece is not perfectly flat, and before I try to glue something on there, I want to make it so. So I'm using some 80 grit sandpaper on a flat block. And I'm being really gentle here because I don't want to put too much upward pressure, and I'm supporting it from above because again this is kind of tenuous at this point. I don't want to pop it off. Nice thing is I've got the X brace right here next to the sound hole, and I can run the flat side of the sanding block up against it, and that kind of registers me and keeps me pretty close to level. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got some devilment afoot here. Because looking at this thing after I've cleaned it up, these grain lines do not match up. This thing must have been a previous repair that broke out again. I mean, it was fit nicely, but that's not the original. And here's the real dead giveaway. If If you look at the edge of the sound hole here, you can see the original top. It's not cut perfectly on the quarter. The grain is actually leaning over quite a ways. But in the pieced-in section, it's perfectly vertical. So, every guitar's got a story. So I'm planing some material that will be inlaid into that missing section. And later on I'll also use it to make a cleat that will span the entire broken part. So I fit the patch in there, continuous checking, taking it out again, paring a little bit off, making sure it fits just perfectly. And then I'll get it clamped in place and glued up using plexiglass on the outside, cork-backed caul on the inside. The actual patch is about 10/1000ths or a quarter of a millimeter thicker than the surrounding wood, so it's above the inner surface. A couple of little clamps in there. Then I can pare off the excess around the inside of the sound hole and sand it level so that the cleat that goes on the inside will span the entire thing and make good contact. Now, the thing that draws your eye to the repair are those two dark lines on either side of the previous installation, and I'd like to disguise those a bit if I can. To do that, I'm going to make up my own semi-opaque lacquer-based paint using powdered pigments. Now, you can buy these in art supply stores, but they're pretty expensive and they come in large quantities. The inexpensive way to do it is to get yourself some artist-quality chalk pastels. Not oil pastels, have to be chalk. Just use the dust from those. I mix these up using lacquer or shellac, and depending on the ratio of dust to lacquer, I get either a thin paintable mix or a kind of paste, which can be helpful in some situations if there's like sunken grain lines or something. I got this idea from Michael Dresner, who's a finishing expert who made a couple of really great instruction tapes and books for fine woodworking, Taunton Press, in the 90s, and they were very helpful. I know Ben Strano watches the channel here, so there's a plug for you, Ben. I'm not looking for perfection in this. This isn't forgery grade work. I'm just trying to blend some of the colors together to keep the eye from settling in one place. So it takes a number of applications. I go back and forth and let things dry. And I can sort of take off some of the gloss if necessary using some 3M pads or something like that. And until I'm satisfied. You know, it takes a little while, but you know, I can even paint in some grain lines if I need to. So it looks pretty good from the player's vantage point. Kind of matches the pick wear and discoloration on the other side of the hole there. Okay, I think we're all set up and ready to go. I installed one of the old Sunrise pickups in it for him. And this looks okay. I think it passes the 6-foot test. I think it also passes the 3-foot test, which is nice. In an old guitar with playwear, pick scrapes, washboarding around the sound hole like this, your eyes aren't going to jump right to it. And of course it took longer than I thought it would. I mean, I thought those pieces were original and they'd slide right in there at full depth. Hadn't bargained on having to inlay the patch under the damage, but you know, such is life. I'm not going to play this one. It's a 55 Gibson. You know, it sounds terrific. Instead, I need to go get some sleep. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.